Welcome back to the On Business podcast. With tons of experience in different industries in Canada and the United States, Danielle and Brandon give you real talk, no nonsense expert advice about running and owning successful companies. Here's your host, Danielle Jenkins and Brandon White.
No, I'm on. Sorry, they've been quiet for hours. And of course, one of the builders have to walk by the window and make them bark. So
we were just talking for 10 minutes with nothing.
Of course, we hit the button and they start barking. But
that's the way it goes.
How are you?
Never better. How about you?
Good. I feel great. For those of you listening who are following our fire or our office burning down story, we have finally obtained a new location as of November 1st. So that's exciting. I have a little bit of a head cold, which sucks, but the show goes on. So I'm drinking tea and taking drugs. And other than that, everything's great. Everything is wonderful.
Well, let's test that and talk about what we're talking about today, which is when former employees either that left and or you fired, or sometimes you even left on what you thought was amicable terms, come back later, or in the termination process, demand more, and what to do. You have a very timely situation going on.
Yeah. And I can share that, and then we can get into your story when it comes to this, because I think there are different results and different outcomes for different cases, but there's still tips that you can prepare for, that you can always have kind of in your back pocket. So a little bit of backstory about my situation here. So I had an employee that worked as a subcontractor where they were not an official employee for 2 years, almost 2 years. And then I hired them on as a payrolled employee for 1 year. So from November 2020 to November 2021, they were on my payroll as a direct employee. So when they were a subcontractor, there were no guaranteed hours. There was no employee agreement. It was just kind of like whenever she was available, she worked for us. We just paid her money. It was up to her to do with what she wanted. But we didn't have to do any employee taxes or anything like that. So when we hired her on, again, she was working weekends because she had another job, and the money was just an extra job for her. So it was part-time hours. So when all of this was going on, this was kind of peak COVID time. And because she was working on weekends, she was cleaning a lot of the office buildings that we had contracts with. So when COVID was peak time, that was a time when people realized that they could work from home. So a lot of the offices that we were cleaning at this time, that she was cleaning, they ended their contract with us because they were no longer working out of the office. They didn't need services. Obviously, they had to cut back financially. So unfortunately, it ended. There were no guaranteed hours with said employee at the time. Again, it was just weekends, but it was also, again, not guaranteed. Very important things to have in your employee contracts and agreements. Make sure you get your lawyer to go through those. I had a discussion with said employee, and I said, unfortunately, these offices have let go of their services due to the current situation in the world. How do you want to proceed? And she was okay with it. We moved on. Everything was fine. We said, okay. So the employment kind of had a natural death. There was nothing harsh. Everybody was still friends. Everybody got along. We paid her a week pay. So in Ontario, the Employment Standards Act says that for every year worked as an employee, you get 1 week's pay for termination pay in lieu of notice. So because everything happened kind of all at once, we said, we'll be fair. We'll give you the funds. All is good. So we gave her a week's worth of pay as per the Ontario Employment Standards Act. So over a year later, Now, well, it was a year ago now, I guess. So last week, I got an email saying, "Hi, it's been a year since I've worked for you. Can I get my holiday or vacation pay?" And we obviously responded with, "Well, you receive your vacation pay on every paycheck when you worked with us, so you're not entitled to any more vacation pay." And she said, "Well, what about termination pay?" And we said, "Well, you received that already." So then she came back saying that she was entitled to 2 more weeks for the 2 years that she was a subcontractor, which in my opinion, or so I thought, she wasn't, but I guess she is. So immediately before starting an issue, before starting a fight, I contacted our lawyer. So one thing to take from this conversation is, again, everything is going to have different outcomes. However, you need to have a relationship with an employee or an employment lawyer, or a business lawyer of some kind that knows employment standards, whether you're in US or Canada. Very important to know. So I reached out, explained the situation, and they helped dissolved the situation. Obviously, we have to pay out, and I'll get into that. However, it's better than saying something or doing something out of emotion and anger, because you feel like punching this person in the face. Well, that's how I felt anyways, because I did them a favor by putting them as a subcontractor so they don't have to pay taxes, or as many taxes, which is a benefit of here in Canada. I'm not sure what it is in the States, but if you are not an employee, you don't have to pay certain taxes. So I helped her out with that. I was flexible with her scheduling and all of those things. It was an amicable separation. I thought that we were on good terms, and a year later, this is what she pulls. So I reached out to the lawyer, and the lawyer, explained to me the law, yes, but that's the minimum, and then explained to me the common law. And based on precedented facts with other cases, some people have to pay a month for every year. So basically, you never want to give in to 100% of what this person is asking for. And our lawyer is always very honest with us and says, ultimately, when it comes to law, 80% of it's common sense, 20% is legal. And really, we just need lawyers to concrete those things. But lawyers are going to string you along, especially in employment law. They need to be direct. They need to be upfront, and they will help you. So within an hour, my lawyer, he's amazing, Amiri, from Hummingbird Lawyers here in Toronto. They are great business lawyers. So anybody who's listening and needs a good firm, I would highly recommend reaching out to them. So we came up with an answer to her email. And basically, we are offering the minimum, which would be the 3 weeks for all years that she worked, because apparently subcontracting still does count as a business relationship. So we offered that. But with that, one thing to remember is we're not just going to give the money here. We want to make sure that there's not going to be any bad mouthing, like any kind of slander, any kind of reputational hazards when it comes to the company. And if this person is coming back a year later asking for money, God only knows what else they could do on social media, on web, whatever it may be, because I can tell you now that person is not going to say nice things about you. So we did up a release and indemnity agreement with the employee, and basically to be able to get the funds that she's asking for, then she has to sign this. And within an hour she did, sent it back, we cut a check, and issue resolved. But the release and indemnity is the most important aspect of this situation. You definitely want to protect yourself when it comes to things like this, because as a small business, you can easily be taken down. People may not want to work for you based on what this client or this employee is saying about you in the community or online. So it can cause a whole slew of issues. And that's really what happened, but it can be so stressful. I know when you and I spoke a few days ago, Brandon, I was stressed because I'm like, how much does this employee think they know? Are they going to accept this offer? Because if they don't, one thing to always think about too, they may not, and they may push this and take it to court, take it to trial, it's going to be expensive and it's going to be a lot. Some situations, lawyers will be honest with the employee at the time and say, this is not even worth your time or money over the $1,000 you're going to get or whatever it may be. So they are going to be honest. However, some do drag out and they can get costly. So you definitely need to speak with a lawyer that knows your business, knows your company, knows the ins and outs of everything. Maybe they're the ones that have done up your employee agreements. But that is the biggest thing to remember and to always be prepared for. You don't need a lawyer or a law firm on retainer, for 24/7. You definitely don't need to do that, but definitely have somebody who you've built a relationship with that when there are issues like this, you can reach out to them. Even if it costs you a couple $100s, it will cost you, or it will save you thousands down the line.
I don't understand. This person, so I don't know Canadian law. Here in the United States in general, California's a little nutty. Actually, California is an interesting state. Sometimes it's really far one way and really far the other. But that person was a contractor for you on a part-time basis. They're not even full-time. In the United States, if you bring on a contracted quote-unquote employee, which would be an individual, for over a year, you start to get into some gray areas, and unless that person has other businesses or another job, which in this case with this person that you're talking about, they did. In the United States, if that person only works for you and you're directing them and you are doing all this, then most states' laws say that is an employee. You have to treat him as an employee, because actually, if you are self-employed in the United States as an individual, you still pay self-employment tax. It's self-employment tax, but it's the same tax you and I as business owners pay to the government to have the employee. It's that when you're self-employed, you have to cover that too. So, but the advantages of being a air quotes contractor is that you get to write off a ton of things related to your business. So in this person's case, if they were doing contract work for cleaning, it's possible that they could write off part of their car. They could write off an enormous amount other things that they can't as an employee. So I don't understand, and maybe this is just a Canadian thing, how that person gets compensated when they were very clearly a contractor. I mean, that law. So was this person incorporated or were they an individual?
They were an individual. And Canadian laws, a lot of people do have, quote, subcontractors because the responsibility is off of the employee. We pay a shit ton of employee taxes. When we have an employee, we pay a lot of taxes to the government, remittance tax, payroll taxes, things like that. So a lot of people want to avoid that. And that's when they do the subcontractor thing, or people get paid cash, because then obviously it avoids all of that.
But it does, just to stop you, it actually doesn't avoid that, because if you pay cash out of your business entity, eventually you can't expense that in your G&A of your P&L as petty cash, because it will be too much, which means if you don't get a receipt at those amounts that you were talking about, it adds up. So it's I'm not saying companies here in the United States also put people as a contractor to quote unquote save taxes, because there's Medicare, Social Security, workers' comp. These things do absolutely add up. And I'm trying to remember as we're talking, I should know these stats off the top of my head, because I was just talking to Yvette about it the other day about one of our company's payroll. I think those taxes wind up costing us in the United States, in California, in general, 3 or 4%. And I think that's the case mostly across all states. So just to come back to your case, she works for you, or he works for you as a contractor for 2 years. the fact that the law says that you now have to count those 2 years, that just screws everything up for any contractor because, right?
I mean, this is the thing, Brandon. It does. And I consider myself very ethically inclined, very morale inclined. And so when this employee was a subcontractor, I could have went 100% quiet and just paid this person cash out of like my personal account, no record of it, no tracking of it, whatever. If I would have done that, there's no proof of anything. So when this came down to it, I could have said, no, you didn't work for me for 2 years. There's no record of it. I don't condone that. I'm not recommending that for anybody. It causes more headaches in the long run. It was because we sent her funds from the company every Friday, like basically as if she had sent us an invoice and we had paid her.
But she technically should have sent you an invoice.
She should have. She didn't. And so that was another thing, and this is kind of off the record for anybody listening. This is not legal advice. I'm just telling everybody kind of what we chat about. But the lawyer said if the employee wanted to push this and push it for an extra 2 weeks worth of pay, which the full 3 weeks of pay literally is equivalent to like $1,200. So for all of this effort for this much money, the lawyer did say that if we wanted to push it, it's on her. She should have claimed those taxes. That income. We did our right by sending her the e-transfer. If she does not claim those on her taxes, that is on her. So if we wanted to be assholes and turned it around, we could have. But again, I'm ethically and morally inclined, and I also have a reputation of a company to protect. And that is why we sent her the funds through the account. Yes, it's still on her technically to claim that money. I don't know if she did or did not, but back to the situation at hand when it comes to paying that termination pay, the lawyer basically puts it out that in Ontario, whether you have an agreement or not, which pisses me off because I spent thousands on a perfect employee agreement to have written up for employees, which really doesn't mean shit at the end of the day when it comes to law. And so the lawyer said to me, whether there's an employment agreement in place or not, it comes down to standard. And if there were funds given in place of service, that is a business relationship that person is technically entitled to termination pay.
This is really tricky. I mean, I don't want any listeners to get the idea that we are anti-employees. It's what we're talking about here today is as employers, how this gets really complicated and really expensive. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure always that employees understand the expenses because a lot of people in general say, oh, well, the owner's making a bunch of money and they're making money off of us and we're here doing this and all this stuff. And, my immediate answer is go start your own company if you want to do that. And by the way, I'll support you. However, it just adds up, and having this huge burden of this stuff it just gets crazy. And I wonder sometimes, I heard the other day a statistic in the United States that legal fees were around 3% of GDP, which is a small percentage. But actually, when you think about that and the number that GDP is, which I'm not going to quote right now because I can't remember exactly what GDP is in the United States, but it'd be easy to Google it and do the math. Like, that's an extraordinary amount of legal fees. So I really wonder sometimes here who wins and why this perpetuates. And I understand inherently that, air quotes, the government wants to take care of employees so that people aren't exploited. The problem is for those of us who treat their employees well, those extreme laws that get made for the extreme cases come back and hurt people like us. And, great. Kudos to you. You paid the 3 weeks, get her to sign the release, which I agree with you. The releases, in my experience over 2 decades, are the hardest thing to get signed because, and I'm saying that even that it gives me a little anxiety, mainly because it's so finite. When they sign that release, it is overdone. You are asking for, so I'm saying for business owners out there, if you feel like, oh man, this is going to be uncomfortable. Now, sometimes it's good to get an attorney involved, but I'll be honest, Danielle, there's been times when I think the attorney made it worse because as soon as we're all humans. So as soon as you put the lawyer in front, now it just became a legal thing.
And people get their backs up about it.
Well, yeah, if you and I would too. If you sent your lawyer and 1 minute I'm talking to you and the next minute I'm talking to your lawyer, I'm going to be pissed.
Right.
I'm going to be pissed because, if it got escalated and it got into this heated battle, I'm probably not going to I still probably going to get pissed, but I'm going to understand.
Right.
If we're just doing something amicable and it happens, I think you risk escalated. And I think attorneys, not everybody's not good or doesn't do the right thing, but I think life is about incentives. And lawyers aren't incentivized to cut the case short. I don't care how you cut this. I don't. You have to look at economic incentives because in general, economic incentives drive behaviors.
Yeah, it's true.
So, going down this rabbit hole here, but because I just wonder, but going back to your case. So basically,
well, and
only wait. Go ahead.
Sorry. All I was just going to say was, in regards to people having their backs up when lawyers are involved. So obviously I had my lawyer involved, but not on the front line. And that was advice from him. Everybody knows me. I'm very calm until I'm not calm. And stuff like this, especially like you said, when I treat my employees extremely well, we had a very amicable end of business relationship. I did what I thought was fair in regards to the situation a year ago. And when that person comes back and starts saying that I'm lying, not being honest, and saying not nice things, that's when I get my back up. And that's when I want to say, here's my lawyer, because I'm being very honest when I say this. When I received that first email, before I didn't even send it, but my first initial response, because I do get hot-headed, and unfortunately that is something I have to calm myself down on and work on. But my first initial response was, if you don't like this, please reach out to my lawyer and information here. That was my first response, or what I wanted to say. But then when I thought about it for that reason, I thought, okay, this could get really messy and we could maybe resolve this without it getting messy. So that's when I contacted the lawyer. I deleted that email. I did not send that email. But when I did respond to this employee in the email, all I said was, hi, so-and-so. I have consulted with my lawyers and they have advised XYZ. And that's how the conversation went. So she knows that there are legal advisors behind, but it's not here, such and such. My name is X lawyer and now you're screwed. It's because people do get their backs up and then they want to go get lawyers and then it gets expensive and then it goes on. But look, we got it resolved in less than 24 hours. And so, there are ways to handle things so people don't lose their shit.
I agree. I'm just, as you're sitting here talking, the thing that bothers me sometimes is that here's what goes on in a business, at least in my mind, as a person runs and owns companies, is, or has and does, is basically says, okay, This person comes in, they say they want 3 weeks. It's $1,200. Let's just use that number. I don't know if it's real or not real. It doesn't matter. I'm going to get my attorney involved. My attorney charges me $400 or $500 an hour. What's the math? And here's the, and this is just me venting because I don't know that it resolves anything, but it's just maddening that the math in my head says pay him because I'm going to pay my lawyer and then I could lose. And now I've paid 3X. So what happens is that you wind up conceding things that you might not otherwise conceded. And in your example, I'm not saying you're not nice. You already were nice. You this is a year ago. Mm-hmm. So I don't even understand where this thing comes out of left field. I feel like this person could have had a conversation over lunch with some friend who said, you could get 3 more weeks of money and you're not past the whatever time that you could make a claim. So maybe you should do that. And then you're in this bind where that it's either the lawyer fees or this fee. So, well, and
on top of the fees, Brandon, the reputation, that's another thing.
Well, sure. The reputation, but I just want to say this because there could be employees listening out there who get the idea like, hey, we can leverage employers all the time. Well, guess what? You also may not get a job again.
Yeah.
Or when you're in a tough spot and you need some side work or you want part-time work, that this person could have come to you after they left and said, hey, Danielle, we worked together for 3 years. It didn't work out because of the economy, basically, right? And hey, can I come back? Well, guess what?
No.
That person's never, ever coming back. So what they lost is an opportunity. They've lost a referral because there's not going to be any reference here. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, and somebody could say, well, I don't care. Okay, well, let's see how that works out in the long run. So, if that person, I guess what I struggle with is, was that person 110% entitled to that, or did they extort you? And, because look, business owners, I make mistakes. Mm-hmm. Hey, if that's the law, but this seems like an interpretation of the law that wasn't worth going to a lawsuit. So I think you have to be, and maybe this comes down to, which then creates another uncomfortable situation, which is making sure that you have ironclad contracts. But once you do that with somebody, now you've turned into this like negotiation thing that takes 5 times as long. The last thing I'll say here on this is the one thing that I've learned is that I won't in general do, unless this person is so exceptional and can give me a really good reason why they haven't incorporated, I'm not going to do business with an individual. Mm-hmm. They've got to have a business.
Yeah.
It's not hard to incorporate.
And if I can say one thing with that, that was the one time that I ever did a subcontractor. And the reason for it was I ended up then hiring them as an employee to prevent issues that I had learned that could come about of subcontractors. And look where we are, even a year later, 2 years, I guess, after hiring that person, to avoid things like this. And this is what comes down from it. And yeah, I mean, there's just so many things, and we're definitely not anti-employees. I treat my employees like gold. I give them the world, and I would give them more if I could. You do the same. And, a lot of it comes down to, like you were saying, is what makes sense, whether it's financially, reputationally, or if that's even a word, whatever it could be. It really does come down to what's worth it, because the $1,200 of the 3 weeks pay, we actually gave an additional gracious week. So it ended up being 4 weeks, to just have the best positive outlook on it, because the lawyer did advise that really if this person wanted to push, and I can talk about it now that the documents are signed, but if this person really wanted to push, I may have to give them 3 months, because the common law and precedent has had before where a person gets a month for every year. So this person was happy. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, here's what you were going to pay. You were for sure going to pay a legal bill with 20 hours invoice. So that's what I'm saying. It's just extortion.
Yeah.
It feels bad, but there's repercussions on the other side.
Yeah.
For sure. But for listeners, when you say subcontractor, it's not that you don't have other subcontractors. It's that you, I think, do not hire people who aren't incorporated.
Yes, exactly.
So I just, for listeners out there, even, and the culture is now a creator community and people out there really creating miniature companies. I think the internet has labeled them or made them, I don't know what they call them. I'm trying to remember, Danielle, but one of the main words is, so they're basically mini businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a mini business, the truth of the matter is, if you're out there, and I've done this, even as a solopreneur, you should incorporate for your own protection, because this is a whole nother episode. If you don't incorporate, your personal assets are a lot closer to a lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
They're not separate.
Yeah.
So I think in that case, just for liability standpoint, and here's not to go down that rabbit hole, but here's what people in those positions tell me. Well, Brandon, and I don't know what it is in Canada, I got to pay a yearly fee. I got to pay a yearly franchise tax. That is absolutely true. You will also have to potentially give away your house if something bad happens because someone makes a claim against you,
mm-hmm.
and your personal net worth. And that's not worth it. Not to mention net, you can write off those expenses as a business expense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you're paying them, but you're getting credit, quote unquote, for it because they're a business expense. So it's just one of those things. But I did learn that lesson. The laws in the United States and in different states can be really strict. The one thing that I didn't understand as a case around this is in California, there's been, and the California citizens voted on it, which turned it down, which was that Uber drivers would be considered employees. And this is very similar to your case, where these people are independent contractors, as it feels like to me, individuals who work for Uber. And there's a group, I don't know what the group is, who is advocating for employees out there. California is an absolutely absurd state in many ways. I mean, just it borders socialism in sometimes, but I think, and I want to say this, like, protecting employees is important, but when it goes beyond that, because the very incentive of those organizations staying alive is creating issues so they can raise money to pay themselves to create issues, that becomes a problem. And that's what goes on. That's what these nonprofits do. And it's sad because ultimately I think a lot of these businesses' goal should be to go out of business, because you should solve something and be done with it. That's a whole nother topic too. Like,
I love it.
Where to donate your money, and my experience with a foundation and giving money to nonprofits for 2 decades. But I think that with the Uber case, it was turned down. But what I don't understand is, why don't you just get all Uber drivers to incorporate? And if I were an Uber driver, I wouldn't be driving people around in my car without being incorporated, because if I get into an accident and something happens that, God forbid, is really terrible, I mean, the legal repercussions of that are crazy. And I don't know the ins and outs of what that contract looks like, but I would bet you, if I were in Uber's case, I would pass a lot of that liability onto that person. And, why not incorporate? So that's really, I think the lesson takeaway is if you're going to hire part-time people, either bring them on as employees and pay them part-time, which I would guess even in Canada classifies them different. I mean, I can't imagine part-time employees are entitled to the same benefit of someone who works 40 hours a week.
The employment law here in Ontario, whether you work 6 hours a week or 60 hours a week, what happens is you are still entitled to 1 week's worth of pay for every year worked. That is the minimum. However, it is based on average hours. So this person did an average of, so it ended up being $1,200. So it was like $400 worth of hours a week. And that's what they were getting paid for their termination pay. However, if somebody did $1,500 worth of stuff, then it would be, $4,000 that they would get. So it just depends on how many hours worked, but they are still entitled to a week's worth of pay regardless.
Well, at least it's prorated. So, because it couldn't be the same as someone who was full time. Otherwise, this turns into you just wouldn't hire anyone part time.
Yeah, it's true.
So I think that's fair. I think that's fair that it's prorated in that sense because it protects the employer. But it's an unfortunate case. I think the answer is to make sure that person is incorporated. So now it's a business. So now all these things instantly go away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they do. They instantly go away. They're a business. You can hire as many business. I've hired a ton of businesses that do different things from sales, marketing, accounting. My accountant is a separate business that I pay a business. I don't pay him as a person.
Right.
So I think that's really the thing. I will say this, that in almost every company that I have run and still do, any potential employee comes on as a contractor for 3 months. And that gets gray because in this sort of advice that I guess I've dished out, or not, it's not advice. You should contact your lawyer. It's my experience. But I've done that because, and I have some other colleagues who run very large companies who do the same thing, mainly to make sure there's a fit. Because when you interview someone and you sit across the table, it's really hard everybody's not the person that they're going to be once you know someone for 40 hours. I'm sorry. In general, even people who are genuine to themselves are still on their best behavior. So that runs a risk. But I think in those cases, as I think about it, I've assumed that risk because I'm already saying yes. So it doesn't necessarily matter. It just eliminates some of the legal work. But more importantly, we and they know that we're both trying each other out before we go through 20 hours of paperwork. There's an expense to bringing an employee on onboarding someone. Yeah. I mean, it just, there's a ton of admin work. So at least you save that. So I'll say that. And I've had similar experiences, not a year later with you, but where actually we brought people on. The skills that they said they had, they didn't have. And in one case, I'm thinking we even test people and they passed the test. I don't know what happened. Maybe they just got lazy. Or they thought they were going to cruise, and they basically extorted us for extra pay, even after 3 months worth of work, 4 months worth of work. But in my mind, it was very simple. One is I will never hire the person again. They will absolutely lose a reference. Word gets around. It's a big world, but it's a small world too. And it was just going to cost me more with my attorney.
Yeah.
And there are cases that I've been in, Danielle, where I'm going to hire my attorney on principle so that our reputation is that we will not get taken advantage of.
Right.
So if you do want to sort of press the line because there's something out there that says that we can get pushed around, or you could get this because they're nice, occasionally you're going to have to put your foot in the ground, and you can't look at that money as on your attorney fees and all that sort of stuff, and time, as importantly, as that case necessarily, but zoom out and say, what do you want your company's reputation to be? I think you want it to be kind, caring, and all those things, but not being able to get taken advantage of, because as soon as that happens, it turns into people could.
Right.
They could take advantage of that. So
right. And those are all great points to everything that we are chatting about. And I mean, we could spin off so many episodes from this. I was just making a note here on my phone about the incorporation, about why you need to be incorporated, and then about the onboarding and hiring those employees too. But ultimately, back down to our main topic, you could have the best employees for years. You really could. I have amazing employees. And unfortunately, life happens to people, and desperate times lead to desperate measures, unfortunately. And it could be a situation like that where, like you said, they have that year threshold after the end of a term of an employment, and then they're going to come back a year later to try and get whatever they can because they can. And so ultimately, I mean, it doesn't even come down to subcontractors or employees or individuals and corporations. It comes down to the fact that people can and will try anything. We've also had situations where we've had a contract with a client and it's went to shit, and it's gotten messy due to their part in the end of a contract termination. So one thing that I must say is always have you need a team of your legal people, your board, you need your advisors, you need your employees, you need your staff, you need all these people. It takes a village. It really does. And you need to have a relationship with some kind of business lawyer or employment lawyer, somebody who you can refer to when and if or when actually these things happen, even if it's just a half an hour conversation with that lawyer to get a clear answer on something before you put your foot in your mouth. And that is something that I have taken graciously, and I'm very appreciative of because I can, I guess, answer abruptly sometimes. And I am thankful for my lawyer to be able to advise on the right things to say when something like this can happen. So that's my advice: is it can happen no matter how great of a boss you are, how great of an owner you are, how well you treat your employees. It can happen. So just get the people on your team that you need. And I'm not talking you need a $50,000 a month law firm like you see in the movies. I'm talking get a business lawyer. Like this situation cost me $470. I had a 1-hour Zoom call with my lawyer. He helped me with the answer to send back. His assistant drew up the release and indemnification or indemnity paperwork, and done. So it's a quick and easy cost to end something like this. And that's all I'm going to say about this situation.
The only thing I'll add for listeners, and from my experience too, is to get the release. It will be uncomfortable for both parties because it is very final and legal language is very raw. Mm-hmm. But without that release, you are opening yourself up to a future situation like you had mentioned earlier when we were talking, that if this person's going to do this now, what are they going to come back with? Oh my God, Danielle, I got an infection that I didn't tell you about. And now that can happen. So
it can happen.
Get the release, but having been there and done it, and I am willing to do it, it can be really hard to do, and be careful how you also deliver it.
Yeah.
Depending on the situation, not necessarily have your attorney, but if you are talking to that person and your attorney's advising you, just tell them, hey, look, there's a release coming. I've got to get that for the business. Mm-hmm. We have got to get that for the business. I hope you understand. If you have any questions, let me know.
Yeah.
And and sort of be that way. So
well,
it's a good lesson.
Well, and it's a great lesson because there's times prior to having legal people behind me where I probably got really lucky that things didn't escalate due to situations that I had no idea about. But for anybody listening, when we say release and indemnity paperwork, I'm going to just add a little bit about that. So if anybody has never went through something like this and has no idea what we're talking about when I say this, a release and indemnity paperwork basically says that this is done. Now you're going to take these 3 or 4 weeks pay. You're signing this paperwork saying that you cannot come back on the company or Danielle or any company to do with Danielle for any more. You cannot, try anymore. You cannot push for any more, anything like that. And then also to put in there that nothing can be said negatively, defamation, no kind of slander or anything about the company in written, oral, or anything like that. And I mean, it's a lot. It's like a 4-page document that even just for this minor one was done up, but they sign it and they cannot come back for any more money. They cannot sue you for any more stuff. They cannot try. They can't write on Facebook that you're the worst ex-boss in the world because you only paid them 4 weeks. Like whatever. Like it protects you. It protects the company from any further financial or issues to do with your reputation in a community. So it's very important when it comes to that.
I agree. It's a good lesson. If anybody listening out there has some experiences and other advice, please write us. All of our information is in the show notes and description. Danielle, have a good week.
You too.